The original Gran Turismo for the PSX shipped almost 11 million copies, making it the best-selling PlayStation title of all time, truly one of the first relatively realistic racing games to attain mass appeal. After that very first taste of realism, gamers slowly started demanding more of it. Over the decades, franchises that tried to at least partially focus on realism slowly took over the market. Today, the PC and console market is full of simcades and sim racing games such as Forza, Assetto Corsa and Dirt Rally, whereas traditional action racing games like Need for Speed and The Crew were pushed out of the spotlight. That puts Initial D fans in a tough spot. Sega had been the sole developer for Initial D games for quite some time, and they don't seem to ever have an interest to put some actual physics into the games. Why are they doing that? Hi everybody, my name is Lord Mouse and I'll be providing vocal commentary for Falbere's video. Basically, everything here is from Falbere's perspective, so you can still get your weekly dose of him. The only difference is that there's a supporting voice throughout the video now. If you like what I do though, be sure to check out my YouTube channel from the link in the description. And if you would like to see, or rather hear, more vocal commentary in future videos, make sure to leave a comment. To help us understand why Sega's rendition of Initial D will always be action-packed and a pure arcade experience, we must talk about its roots. Back in the 2000s, the Initial D manga was flying off the bookshelves, and the anime adaptation had just become a worldwide phenomenon. If you wanted Initial D games, you did have some options. There were games released for the Sega Saturn, the PSX and even Game Boy. If racing games aren't your thing, then don't worry, they've still got you covered. Introducing Initial D Ryosuke Takahashi's Fastest Typing Theory, an Initial D themed typing game for the PS2. These games might be fun for a while, but what Sega was about to release would make all these games pale in comparison. Introduced in 2002, Sega's first Initial D game hit the game centers and arcades across Japan. Featuring real-life tracks, real cars, and a sick Eurobeat soundtrack selection straight from the anime adaptation, it looked like the game was set for success. However, it wasn't perfect. The physics were floaty, and shifting up rapidly was faster than just going through the gears normally. This prompted the release of version 2 just a year later in 2003, which addressed most of these issues. Instead of being a full-featured game on its own, version 2 is more like an update that patched stuff up and added some new content. Little did Sega know at that time that version 2 would cause the Initial D fever to spiral out of control globally, leaving a long-lasting impression all the way from Japan to America. By addressing the key issues of version 1, the competitive gaming community now saw Initial D as a viable, battle-ready game that took a lot of skill to master. Unlike the competitive sim racers of today, Initial D's gameplay was extreme, requiring immense precision for the player to go lock to lock on the 540-degree arcade wheel within split seconds, as you could take hairpin turns at ridiculous speeds. Sega's Initial D became set in motion as not just any average casual racing game, but more like an esports title. Falbere would really like me to go over the full history of Initial D in actual seriousness, but unfortunately, the history is not what we are here to talk about today. However, if you are interested in us talking about the entire history of Initial D arcade stage, be sure to drop a comment down below. From the success of version 2, Sega saw that Initial D was destined to be a great platform for a competitive game. From then on, no matter what type of story mode they put into it, no matter how they revamped the game's customization system, Sega would always spend a large portion of their resources into the physics engine. However, realism never was on the chart. Casual players would often find the game controls on modern Initial D games too arcadey and not realistic enough. What happened? Insanely grippy flying saucers were acceptable in the early 2000s, but in 2019? If you are quick to jump to a conclusion, you probably think that Initial D physics might not have improved at all since the game's first release. But once you dive deep into the games, it seems that every Initial D arcade stage release got completely different physics. That would be bizarre in the eyes of most gamers that aren't in the loop about Initial D games. Did Sega mess up? Not quite. The competitive player base is basically on the rise every single year. Every day, there are more and more people picking up Initial D and enjoying it to its fullest. Turns out, each game's physics could be easily broken down into very simple, fundamental mechanics that are easy to understand. In a sim racer, you would slow down for a corner, trace the racing line and accelerate as you exit, right? In Initial D, the game is more about maximizing the car's turning potential and slowing down as little as possible. Steering earlier than normal and using the brake and gas pedals to trigger brake cancels push the cars to turn at crazy speeds that otherwise wouldn't be possible. Sega's intentional inclusion of these systems, which are easy to learn but hard to master, had helped nurture the competitive player base and made Initial D into games that have a definitive learning curve and high skill ceiling. This is true for every Sega Initial D game. Even games that were cited to be more realistic than other releases, such as Arcade Stage 5, don't lack their set of own mechanics that are different from sim racers. Notorious for its tire management system, Arcade Stage 5 rewards patience. If you had seen old time attack videos of Arcade Stage 5, you might think that the game is like a simcade, where you slow down to take turns. But those cars could have easily taken turns at much higher speeds. Just that wasting tires too early on would result in slower splits in later sections of the track. That's the beauty of Initial D. There are lots of different strategies. In other racing games, you would usually only start getting into complex strategies when races have a longer length to require pit stops, tire changes and refueling. In Initial D, strategy is condensed into a short 3-minute race. Setting the boost to on will cause the player to gain or lose boost based on drifting, tire management and a large variety of factors depending on the game version. That's right, boost on is not a rubber banding mechanic. In fact, it makes the game a more leveled playing field than without boost. Why? Track design. Initial D's track selection does not consist of wide open circuits with multiple lines to choose from. The tight and narrow nature of Toge means that blocking your opponent from an overtake traditionally is almost too easy. Want proof? Just join Euro's community that frequently holds Toge battles on the famous sim racing game Assetto Corsa. Extra rules had to be put in place to ensure a fair experience. But in an arcade racer like Initial D where there is online matchmaking, you can't just set rules and expect people to follow them. Boost is so complex that it most definitely deserves its own video. Without Boost, Initial D would be a less competitively viable game and certainly not the arcade racer that we all love and enjoy. Sega had made the game physics as competitively viable as a Toge racing game could be, and in consequence couldn't make them realistic. But it is time to ask the question, does every racing game have to be realistic? Physics accuracy is certainly cool. Falbere is a big fan of sim racers too, occasionally enjoying games like Assetto Corsa and Dirt Rally. But action racing should not be criticized for their lack of realism. For one, we already spent most of our lives in real life. Starting up a video game to see what game developers have to offer in our virtual world is one of the reasons why people play video games in the first place. To not copy everything from real life also requires creativity. The Initial D developers always completely revamped the physics in every game, so there's never a fear of it feeling just like the older game and it getting boring. But with sim racers, what you do in different sims to get the fastest lap typically ends up being the similar stuff. In most other game genres, action is often more welcome than realism. Counter-Strike was never the most realistic shooter game, but people still love it. That's because the community was able to look past the things that don't make sense in real life and focus on the solid gameplay mechanics that make the game fun. That's why, as gamers, we should also be more open to action racers. Instead of shrugging racing games off as being unrealistic, maybe try the games first, then decide for yourself if you had fun playing them. Thanks for watching!
Sometimes I hear the whisper.